welcome to the next season of the Iowa Files. Is this our 6th or 7th year? I think. Oh my gosh. We would not have this series here and live streamed if not for the generosity of the Friends Foundation of the West Des Moines Library, the staff here at the library, and Bravo Greater Des Moines. So we want to thank them for all of their support. So what do you got to do to get a neighborhood named after you? It kind of helps if you're a founding father of the city. The Union Army paymaster, form a bank, that helps. Insurance company. So if you can do that, you too can have an amazingly beautiful neighborhood named after you. So we're thrilled to pieces to have Robert Warren, the CEO of the Hoyt Sherman Foundation here. And he's going to teach us all about this man who I have a feeling was good friends with James Jordan since they were contemporaries. So thank you so much for coming, Mr. Warren.
Good afternoon. Happy Sunday. So that photo there is what Hoyt looked like when he came here originally, when it was still Fort Des Moines, 1848. Wasn't even a city yet. But he saw great things and decided that he would make this a place to stay and enjoy. So we'll start not all the way back, but the Sherman family tree pictured here, which we have etched on the wall at Hoyt Sherman Place. The root of the tree is 1438 with Thomas Sherman, who was born in Essex County, England. Had 11 children, seemed to be a theme in the Sherman family. Almost all of the generations had 11 children, including Hoyt being number 10 of 11. But at the very bottom of that tree, it's also noted that they can trace the ancestry back to 1256. And the name Sherman comes from their profession. They were mutton farmers and sheep shearers. Thus, the name Sherman became the family name. So if you come to Hoyt Sherman Place and walk up to the newly restored second floor mansion or take the new accessible lift that we put in, you can see that beautiful Sherman tree. That little red dot up at the top, that's Hoyt. That's how far and wide that tree expands. So I just thought, since Hoyt was a founding father of Des Moines, I would give you a little bit of history of how he came here and who else in his family was quite prominent. So he is the 10th child of 11 of Charles Sherman, who was born in Norwalk, Connecticut in 1788. Married right after high school and moved to Lancaster, Ohio, and was a self-taught lawyer, which, fast forward, Hoyt and a lot of his brothers were self-taught lawyers, so a lot of brain power in that family. During the War of 1812, he was a major in the Ohio militia, and by 1823, he became a judge in the Ohio Supreme Court. Back in the day, they rode by horseback around to the different courthouses, and sadly, Judge Sherman died of pneumonia and was buried in a small little town of Lebanon, Ohio, later reinterred back in his hometown of Lancaster. But he had 11 children and a widow with no means of support. So the real hero in Hoyt's family, I think, is his mother, Mary Hoyt Sherman, which is why the first name of Hoyt is so unusual, but it was actually her maiden name. So she picked her last son to carry on that family name. She was born in 1787, also from Connecticut, moved to Lancaster, and literally raised all of those 11 children by herself, with a little help with the older kids from other prominent members of the Ohio Supreme Court. Sadly, she died at 64 years of age, which wasn't actually that young back in the 1850s. My terminology, I just referred to the Sherman family as the 1850s versions of the Kennedy family. So all 11 of the children were sent out to prosper in different areas. The daughters got into mercantile and fashion and writing, and all of the sons did legal work and military. But of course, the most famous of the Shermans is his older brother, who raised him as his dad, because Hoyt was only 3 years old when his real father passed away. So General Sherman and his other older brother, John Sherman, helped raise little Hoyt and his baby sister. General Sherman was born also in Lancaster, 1820, lived until 1891. He was, because he was old enough to work, he was sent to work for Thomas Ewing, who became a U.S. Senator. He apprenticed with Mr. Ewing, who helped him get into the military academy at West Point. General Sherman was a brilliant student, but he graduated third in his class because he had the most demerits of any student at West Point to this day. He was a rebel rouser. At 6'7" with bright red hair, you can imagine why he would get in trouble the way that he did. Ironically, when he went to live with Thomas Ewing, who became a U.S. Senator, he was growing up with their daughter, Ellen Ewing, who he was very fond of. And later on, not related, he ended up marrying Ellen Ewing in a fancy ceremony in Georgetown with 3 presidents and several other Civil War dignitaries in attendance. After graduating West Point, he really didn't like the military service, so he decided he would get into a different occupation, and he was the superintendent of what is now LSU, then called Louisiana State Seminary and Learning Military Academy in 1859. He loved the job until the presidential elections changed, and the new president was sympathetic to the South and wanted to continue with slavery, so he and his baby brother Hoyt both resigned immediately when the presidency was favorable to keeping slavery. He moved back up north into Lancaster area and became the commander of the First Battle of Bull Run in 1861, which a lot of people only see him as this tough, ruthless military hero who ended up winning the war for the North by burning down the city of Atlanta, minus the one small community that was his classmate at West Point. He worked around that town and never demolished it, but he was so offended and upset by the carnage of war that he actually had a mental breakdown. They sent him back for a little period of leave. He went back and stayed with his mother for about 6 months, and then slowly came out of that depression and decided that he could be the greatest military strategist if it wasn't about the sacrificing of life, but more about large-scale destruction, working on infrastructure, taking out bridges, taking out towns, taking on roads. So that was his goal. Obviously, Union General with the capture of Atlanta and the march to a sea in 1864. So if you come to Hoyt Sherman Place, the Byers Room, which is the second gallery, Major Byers was General Sherman's number 2 throughout the Battle of Atlanta. Major Byers wrote Sherman's March to the Sea. He was a better writer than he was a soldier. He had been captured 5 times and escaped on the 5th time and knew that he was close enough in the prison camp in Virginia that he could meet up with General Sherman, and took him this handwritten note that he had smuggled out of the camp, and that truly became the rallying cry. There's a song, Sherman's March to the Sea. Long story short, Major Byers actually was born and raised in Oskaloosa. So when he found out that Hoyt Sherman's mansion had been turned into a museum, post-Civil War, Major Byers and his wife went into the diplomatic corps. He was the ambassador to Austria for 16 years under 2 different presidents and had a fabulous collection of art from Europe. He donated it to Hoyt Sherman Place in 1915 with a stipulation that they build a second gallery. So come on down, you'll see that history too. General Sherman actually came and visited his baby brother twice. On the second visit, he had agreed that he would shake hands with any Union soldier, any military person that wanted to meet him. They started lining up 3 days in advance once the news got out. So Women's Club and other members of the community were putting up tents and bringing food, and it was not the warmest part of the year, so they had shelter for them and blankets, and General Sherman, in fact, shook hands for 11 and a half hours, every person that was waiting just to meet him on the front steps. Another brother, older brother, born 2 years after General Sherman. He decided he would come to Des Moines after Hoyt moved here a year later. He was the first person to help draft the charter for Fort Des Moines to become the city of Des Moines. He was a city council member. He was an investor and then part co-owner of the Bank of Hoyt Sherman once Hoyt opened that. He married Rebecca Lawson, and they had 8 children. The interesting part of that, of their 8 children, only 5 of them survived the drinking water in Des Moines at the time and all of the other plagues of children. A lot of children died early. So that was the impetus for Hoyt to create the waterworks system. He was the founding partner that created the waterworks system that's still going strong and sadly still has drinking water issues. Lamson lived in a house that's now part of Drake University. It's on the campus, which is now part of the National Historic Registry. The other brother, John Sherman, most notable because he rose to, after becoming a self-taught lawyer, to the New York State Supreme Court, and he is the author of the Sherman Antitrust Act, which is still used to this very day. He was a very, very politically minded person. He wanted to raise up to the ranks of president. He tried 3 times, always came in second, because exactly like his older brother, he was 6'7", flaming red hair. He had a horrible, wicked laugh, which apparently in political circuits, if you remember, was it Gary Hart that had the evil laugh that took him out of the Iowa caucuses? But he had a vicious laugh. He had terrible breath and awful teeth. Even though he had the influence of his older brother, they ended up nicknaming him the Ohio Icicle because he just didn't warm up to people. But thankfully, the Sherman Antitrust Act still works on. He rose all the way up to Secretary of State under President William McKinley. So as I said, it was a pretty prolific family. Hoyt and Sarah had 7 children of their own, also lost 2 due to dysentery, poor drinking water. 5 survived to adulthood. Adeline was the oldest daughter. Very, very smart family. Everybody went on to big schools. She ended up in New York. She married well to Mr. Wyborg, who owned the Dunes Estate in East Hampton, which today is almost the entire property of East Hampton. So imagine 8,000 acres in Long Island. So they had a little bit of money. Mother of 3 daughters, Mary, Olga, and Sarah. Remember that name, Sarah, named after her mother who passed away. Was the darling of Hoyt Sherman. They stayed in close touch. And Adeline, sadly, and her husband, even with all the money, the medical advances weren't great. They died very early. So Sarah became a ward of Hoyt Sherman when he was still in Des Moines, and he put her up in a boarding school in Davenport, Iowa, which was a very, very smart decision. His other daughter, Helen Sherman Griffith, who actually grew up in the mansion that I'm going to show you that Hoyt built, born in 1873 here, died in 1961 out in Rhode Island. Hoyt's uncles of the Sherman family from Connecticut and Pennsylvania, his uncle was a naval sea captain, and he created and built the naval port in Portsmouth, Rhode Island. So all of the other side of the family had summer homes there, including Helen Sherman. And if we have time, I'll share a couple of letters that they found in her beach house that were donated to me just 2 years ago. Whole treasure trove of documents that she and her great-great nephew had saved in this cottage that they were going to tear down, but some lovely letters. Lived at Hoyt Sherman Place from 1877 to 1894. Super popular Des Moines lady. All of the wealthy members of Des Moines society liked her, wanted to go to parties because she was a singer and she could play piano at Hoyt Sherman Place in the original mansion, and they fell in love with her. Went on to NYU, became a New York Times best-selling author with a whole series all based on women adventurers called Letty Gray. We have the originals now at Hoyt Sherman Place, including one New York Times best-selling novel for her father's autobiography. Her last visit to Des Moines in 1914, after the Women's Club had already been leasing the mansion, she was thrilled that the legacy was staying and that her father's name was very prominent in the city. Her last dying years were spent, as I said, in the Sherman estate in Portsmouth, Rhode Island. So why did I go through all of that history before we got to Hoyt himself? So Sarah Sherman, the granddaughter that Hoyt took on as his caregiver and put her up in the school in Davenport, born in 1883, granddaughter of Hoyt and Sarah. His oldest daughter, Adeline, was her mother, attended Yale University, and met and got engaged to this lovely little man called Gerald Murphy. Gerald Murphy's family owned Mark Cross Pens and several other prominent leather businesses in New York City, extremely wealthy. They didn't like Sarah because they thought she was lowbrow. She was from a military family, and how dare they drag her son down. Well, Gerald and Sarah were college sweethearts at Yale, fell in love, tried to make the parents happy on both sides, moved to New York City to be closer to Gerald's parents, had a beautiful little apartment, had two adorable children, and the infighting between the Sherman grandparents and Gerald's grandparents, Sarah and Gerald decided to give up. They said, to hell with our parents, let's move to Paris. Let's move to Paris. My mom took me to Paris when I was 8 years old. I loved it. Let's just go. Let's have a little fun. We'll come back to New York eventually. Well, they land in Paris. They find a cute little apartment, big enough for them and their two kids. And lo and behold, their neighbor is Pablo Picasso. Pablo Picasso falls madly in love with the look of Sarah Sherman, this beautiful Midwestern, golden-haired, blue-eyed girl, and says to her husband, Pablo was not that prominent at the time. He said, if you allow me to use your wife as a model for some of my paintings, I'll teach you how to paint. I can't pay you anything else, but I'll teach you how to paint. So fast forward to today at MoMA in New York, there are 4 Picasso portraits featuring Sarah Sherman Murphy and 2 from her husband, Gerald Murphy, who became good enough to get his works of art accepted in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Even better than the football hero. But Sarah and Gerald then became the it couple of the 1920s. Pablo said, you're just too fun, you're too friendly. I want to introduce you to some of my circle. So he took them to Key West to meet Ernest Hemingway. And they spent 3 months in Key West in the off-season of the French Riviera that wasn't really that popular at the time. And Ernest Hemingway fell in love with Gerald and Sarah as well, to the point that Gerald was a little nervous that Mr. Hemingway was getting a little too attached to his wife. So then he asked Pablo, he said, what other friends do you have? So he said, well, you need to meet my friends in Long Island that are near your parents' estate. I'll see if they want to take in you and the children for the summer. They love company. F. Scott and Zelda Fitzgerald. So Sarah and Gerald Murphy go to live with F. Scott and Zelda for a summer with their kids. They also fall in love with this lovely Midwestern charm of Sarah and the kids. And if you like to read, Tender is the Night by F. Scott Fitzgerald is Sarah and Gerald Murphy. They were the impetus for that book. So pick it up, you will love it. Okay, so now here we are. You know a little bit of the family legacy. Hoyt and his lovely bride in that first picture there. When Hoyt got to Fort Des Moines, there were 128 residents. There were no eligible females. He got his law degree. He started practicing law. He started to make a little bit of money. He opened the bank of Hoyt Sherman and Company. 8 years go by, and he's realizing that maybe this is the place that he wants to stay. The city had been incorporated, and he decided to go back to his hometown of Lancaster, Ohio, and see if Sarah would marry him, his childhood sweetheart. So he got there the day before Christmas. He proposed on Christmas Eve. They got married Christmas Day, and Sarah came back by train partially and then horse and buggy the rest of the way, but they established their house. And of course, General Sherman always overlooking his shoulder. General Sherman, after the Civil War, got into banking in New York, helped his brother, baby brother. That center picture there, if you can see it, that's the entire Sherman family, all 11 of them, the only portrait we have. General Sherman is the tallest one, second to the end. John Sherman is in the middle. Hoyt is a little bit shorter. All of the sisters sitting on the steps of Hoyt Sherman's mansion. And we'll take you to here. So Hoyt decided that, I'm guessing like a lot of people, manifest destiny was the thing. There were all this open property, there was acreage to be had, there were opportunities for that to be given to you. He was fortunate enough that his older brother had lots of connections through his West Point days, and he was appointed by Zachary Taylor to come out and actually create the post offices in Iowa. There were no post offices. So that was his destiny. Came out and he truly did build the first post office. He was not of legal age. You had to be 21 to be a postmaster. So his mother had to co-sign for him to be able to start building the post office at age 19. After he got his law degree, his primary focus was land acquisitions. He helped the Rock Island Railroad go across the state of Iowa, which was very, very important for the entire state. Because of the fact that his father died when he was only 3, I think he had that internal possession to realize that you got to take care of yourself, you got to take care of others. He helped out with his baby sister. But he came all the way out here and absolutely loved it. He loved the convergence of the Raccoon River and the Des Moines River. He only, of all the art collection at Hoyt Sherman Place, he only commissioned one piece of art by the gentleman by the name of Forgy, who was a painter who had a shop where Unity Point Hospital is right now, just down the street where Hoyt lived originally. And he commissioned him to do a painting of the convergence of the Raccoon and the Des Moines River, and where Principal Park is now. If you come to Hoyt Sherman Place, there was a covered bridge that crossed the Raccoon right at that convergence, and he loved that. And ironically, in the frame that they built for it, little ears of corn carved all around the entire frame in gold leaf. So he had a great sense of humor, a great personality. And he was only, just a kid, but time moves on. So very, very, very smart, got the bar in 1849. A lot of lawyers at the time were self-taught. I don't know if you could get away with that today. In 1849, he was the official postmaster when the city of Des Moines was declared a city. And the original first post office, banks, street railways, public schools, and colleges were all the impetus of Hoyt Sherman. In 1850, the 5 acres of land where Hoyt Sherman Place stands now, it was a farm estate sale. Times were hard. The farmer went bankrupt. It was called the Pursley Estate. And Hoyt decided that he would help the family because he didn't want them to be broke and the children to go into a welfare situation. So he purchased the land from them for $100,005, which was a lot of money at the time. Sorry, 105. And 50 cents was the lawyer fee that he paid himself, just so that family could have enough money to survive on. He didn't build on it right away, but he knew, having seen Terrace Hill and the Capitol, the elevations of the land, that Sherman Hill, which was called Oak Hill up until 1978, He knew that Oak Hill really was the next highest peak, and if he wanted to rise to prominence, he would do it. So he bought the property and sat on it for a while. Bank of Sherman opened in 1854, merged with the Bank of Iowa by 1858. As I said, he married Sarah Moulton in 1855. 7 children, 5 survived. In 1860, he was called up by his older brother to come to service on the Civil War. President Lincoln set him up as the paymaster. He worked out of Springfield, Illinois. He never saw active duty, but in his discharge papers, President Lincoln had already been assassinated. So the generals that signed off on it, the quote was, "The penny-wise paymaster." In the entire 4 years that he was the paymaster for President Lincoln, his books were not off by a single penny, ever. If only we could have that kind of accounting in the government today. The war is over. He comes back to Des Moines. He's a celebrated war hero. He brings his brother more celebrations, and he partners up with B.F. Allen, Charles Polk, each with a $100,000 investment, and they create Equitable of Iowa Life Insurance, the first and only life insurance company and insurance company west of the Mississippi, at the urging of his older brother, who was in banking and insurance in New York. And they were sending all the money, all the crop insurance, everything was being sent to New York. And General Sherman said, "Hoyt, open your own business, open your own insurance company, keep your money local, reinvest it," because the dollars, if you will, were not that stable at the time. Keep your money close to home. And so he did. He rose to the ranks of president of Equitable of Iowa. The first building is the one that you see on the bottom right there. That's at 3rd and, Court and 3rd, which I believe now has been converted to Cabco. It's been a lot of businesses, but the building still exists. So the original Equitable, eventually, when they started making a lot of money, they built that beautiful tower at 7th and Locust that is still there today with that white, gorgeous alabaster top and the red brick, which has been converted to apartments and condos, and I believe Potbelly Sandwich Shop is in the lower level. But the Equitable building is still there. All of the Sherman's names are on the walls, as are the rest of them. Constantly wanting to give back. Sadly, Sarah died early at 53 years old. His lovely wife died of what today would just be a common cold that turned into pneumonia. There were no hospitals in town. So Hoyt begged the Sisters of Mercy from Davenport, Iowa, to come and create a hospital in Des Moines. And part of the trade-off was he would give them full use of the 27 rooms of Hoyt Sherman's mansion as the first Mercy Hospital. So for 2 years, he lived in the kitchen and the dining room with a small cot, and they took over the rest of the rooms, and mostly soldier patients. The surgeries happened in the basement, probably because it was a little cooler and maybe you couldn't hear the screams as much because there wasn't a lot of anesthesia. They had a lot of Civil War amputees, all of that, and we found the logbook. Any surgery was $5. So whether you were having something added on or taking off, it was $5. And if you had to spend the night, it was another 25 cents. But there was a strong cadre of doctors in the town. In fact, when the Women's Club was first founded, one of the founding members, Callista Halsey Patchen, her husband was a doc that brought her to Des Moines from the Georgetown training facility. She was a founding member of the Women's Club, helped them decide that art and education should be their charter. And eventually, when her husband got transferred back to D.C., she became the first female reporter for the Washington Post. So there's another great book that the Washington Post is just celebrating its 150th anniversary. It's called Callista Goes to Washington, and it's about a young 21-year-old girl striking out and becoming a female reporter. But Hoyt then came back into the house and lived there until 1904 when he passed away. Because the hospital had taken out so many of the furnishings and the fixtures and the chandeliers, things to try to control the germs and everything else, it was pretty rough shape, and none of his surviving children wanted to come back into the mansion. So they came to town, they picked up some of his private papers and struck an agreement with the city of Des Moines. They said, we will give you the 5 acres of land and the mansion if you agree to one stipulation, that it forever be called Hoyt Sherman Place and that you protect this house. And the city agreed. They didn't have any money at the time. 1905 was a rough year. They mothballed the house. They did declare the front lawn as an official city park. They let the kids from the elementary schools in the neighborhood, Gateway Market today, that was one of the biggest elementary schools in Sherman Hill. And so they would come down and play kickball and everything else in the front lawn of Hoyt Sherman Place. But fortunately for us, in 1907, the Des Moines Women's Club came knocking. They had been formed in 1895. Their clubhouse was rented space above the old downtown library, which is now the World Food Prize. They'd outgrown that space. The stairs were tough to navigate for a lot of the ladies, so they asked the city, they said, we will lease Hoyt Sherman's home from the city for $1 a year for 10 years, and we will agree to fix up the mansion again, and we'll build a small art gallery and auditorium on the west side, which they did. They signed the lease, $1 a year for 10 years, 1907. Within a year, the first small auditorium on the right side was completed. They hung up all their art. It was a free public art gallery, and they became the most prominent club in Des Moines. Everybody wanted to be a club member. You had to be voted on to get in. They had this archaic old system of a box with black balls and white balls, and every woman was given one of each in a white glove. And after the person that was trying to get into the club would do their presentation, they would vote, and they would walk up and they would secretly drop in a white ball or a black ball. If you got one black ball, you were not admitted into the women's club. So within that first 10 years, the most popular club in town, over 600 members. They were bursting at the seams. They had gutted the second floor of the mansion for overflow dining space for the ladies. The club officers, the board members got to be fed upstairs. The rest of the ladies were on the lower galleries. They decided to go back to the city and said, hey, we've done what we promised. This is 1916. We're nearing the end of our first 10 years. We're going to ask for a better deal. If you will give us a 100-year lease at $1 a year, we will build a big auditorium. We will build enough space for all of our members and a guest to come. So that was the impetus behind the Hoyt Sherman Place Theater. Mrs. Fred K. Whites was the president of the Women's Club board at the time, thus White's Construction. Fred White's grandmother was the president. And with a handshake deal, the city leaders, this is in a day where women couldn't rent a hotel room under their own name, that the city leaders agreed that this club has everything that it takes to make this happen. So handshake deal, they said 100-year lease, we'll extend it to 2097, not doing the math, 100 years from 1917. So they signed the deal. Fred White's grandfather got the contract to build the theater, 1,400 seats, so it would accommodate their expanded guest list and a friend. And the day after the deal was signed, the United States entered World War I. So everything was mothballed. The theater was put on hold. The building sort of went into quiet mode. The ladies started doing bandages and everything else for the World War I effort. But the best thing about that hiccup. The theater was designed based on a 1915 Broadway house that had no amplifications. 2 beautiful stacked main floor balcony, not any more than 40 feet from the stage. You could hear a pin drop. If somebody just walked out in a normal voice without a microphone, you could hear them in the back row. That was a blessing, because even though they didn't get to finish the theater till 1923, when they were already talking movies and all the silent film era had gone by, they didn't alter the acoustics. So we have this perfect gem of a theater that opened in 1923, which would have been ready for 1915. A lot of our artists to this day, when they come into the room, especially those that have perfect pitch, Diana Krall, all of those, and they're like, wow, this room just sounds like a bell. I can hear every note of the piano coming back to me at the same time. So they'll say, would you mind if we unplug our guitar or take the microphone off the piano and just do a little acoustic number for the audience? And of course, everybody goes crazy. So all of these things that Hoyt did, we feel, plus the Women's Club, is what has helped the city of Des Moines be ranked so high, especially the interest in the arts. The Women's Club focus of bringing in the best and the brightest minds just to educate and entertain the members of the club, everybody from Helen Keller to Amelia Earhart to Jonas Salk, Grant Wood, Meredith Wilson, just to come in and spend a Wednesday afternoon with the members of the club, and they would have lunch and tea, and they would all write in the autograph book how much fun they had and what they did. But that, I think, has a lot to do with the character of Des Moines and the reason there's such a huge focus on the arts, the Des Moines Arts Center, the Civic Center, all of these other places. We don't have a professional football team. We don't have mountains and ocean, but we have a heck of a lot of culture in the city of Des Moines. We are now have overtaken Hartford, which was the insurance capital of the United States for 157 years. More dollars of insurance, more employees in the insurance business, and more companies in insurance. Sadly, I lived in Hartford for 4 years. They're declining on the other side of the universe. But healthcare, we had David Sedaris a couple years ago. He's coming back in 2 months. He loves to walk around the town, and he cornered me backstage and he said, "Why do you have so many hospitals?" There are like 11 hospitals that I saw in my 3-mile walk. So he must have gone up by Lutheran and around by Unity Point and back around this way. But it's good to have good health care. And the waterworks is still going strong. Let's see if we can fix some of the other issues there. But built well and running well. And of course, Fleur Drive is now done. So, yes. Now, population, just in that short time of Hoyt Sherman's life, from 127 residents to 215,000 just downtown dwellers, and another 700,000 in the region. As I said, insurance capital. U.S. News and World Report ranks us as 12 out of the top 50 cities that are growing. And Hoyt Sherman Place is still serving the public with over 400 events each year. All of the original stakeholders that helped build that facility were not displaced. I will celebrate my 10-year anniversary here, September 25th. And I saw great potential in the building, and I knew that they were struggling financially. The Women's Club, sadly, in the late 80s, 90s, when clubs were dying, their membership had dwindled down to under 100. They couldn't maintain the facility anymore. The air conditioning was shot. All the roofs had issues. And so they went back to the city and they said, "We want to save this. We can't do it on our own. We've done everything we can. What's the next best thing?" And ironically, Fred Weitz, the grandson, and Luther Hill, a prominent lawyer in town, and city leaders got together and said, "Let's form a foundation. Let's form a private foundation and live up to the promise that the city leaders made to Hoyt Sherman's children in 1904, that the building will always be protected and it will always be called Hoyt Sherman Place. So that was the charter in 1995. The foundation that I now lead, for the first 20 years, struggled a lot. They tried a couple of outside management companies. They tried people that were not familiar with Des Moines or the beauty and the success that that theater could be. And so when I came in 2015, I just said, we can't sacrifice on the art anymore. Look at what the Women's Club did in the early days. Look who they brought to town. You can bring Meredith Willson to Des Moines to preview The Music Man before it even goes to Broadway. You can bring Amelia Earhart in to show off her fashion line 3 months, sadly, before she died. Grant Wood to come and actually paint on the stage. I said, that's the history, that's the legacy. So we started attracting, of course, my 13 years at the Kennedy Center, I had a few names in my Rolodex, and we just decided, let's bring in Dave Chappelle, let's bring in Martina McBride, let's bring in all of the people that we know can help fill up this theater and do away with the myth of nobody wants to be inside in the summer. And so slowly but surely, my first year here, the theater was looking at a $235,000 deficit. By year 2, we had a $585,000 surplus, started repaying back the endowment fund. Another fun fact, when the city finally agreed with the Women's Club to let them out of the last years of their lease to create a foundation, they said, we have 2 stipulations. Yes, it'll always be called Hoyt Sherman Place, but we want the Women's Club to sell enough of their art collection to put $1 million into a permanent endowment fund for the care of the facility, and to agree that all the contents, everything else that they had acquired over the years, would also be protected by the foundation. So the artwork, all of that, they agreed. They brought in a gentleman from Sotheby's, 1995, pre-cell phone days. He walks in and love her. Annabelle was the leader of the organization for 56 years. She brings him in and he walks around the corner and he sees a painting that was mislabeled, wrong artist, wrong title, and he says, Annabelle, can I use your phone? And he calls back to New York on the landline. He said, the Frederick Edwin Church painting to his mentor, Thomas Cole, is here in Des Moines, Iowa. We have been looking for this piece for 85 years. So he said, this one might get you to your $1 million. They wrapped it up. They took it over to what's now Unity Point Hospital and x-rayed it to make sure that it got to New York in the same condition that it left Des Moines, cleaned it up, sold it at auction the next year, $4.6 million. Bill and Melinda Gates were the buyers, so I'm going to ask for it back in the divorce. They don't need it. And fast forward 30 years later, that entire endowment fund, we're up to close to $6 million now, so we've repaid everything. Even during COVID, we didn't have a negative year. We just switched focus from producing all those shows. We're doing about 100 headliners a year now that are enough to make the theater operations a for-profit business if it was all by itself. So every donated dollar goes to our free programming for students, keeping the gallery and mansion open Monday through Friday free of charge, and all of the other community events that we're able to host. Halloween on the Hill, food drives. During COVID, we did battery drives for the nurses and doctors at Unity Point so they could come in and make sure that their battery was charged up so they wouldn't get stalled in the winter. And it's just really, and as I said, Oak Hill, which was a really, really rough neighborhood in the 70s and 80s. The impetus for getting that on the National Historic Register and having the entire neighborhood protected, all those historic homes, they had to have a hook for the National Park Service and the Historic Preservation Trust. And so they said, well, we've got Hoyt Sherman, the younger brother of General Sherman, his mansion is still there, and it's thriving as a home for the women's club, and that was the hook, and they renamed it Sherman Hill. So happy times, good people, and I am right about at the point where I can take questions from you.
I don't have a question, but I have something to share. I lived in Hawaii for 40 years, and during that time, I ran into many times a young man named Jake Shimabukuro. And like we would go with my friend's baby, and he'd jump around, and Jake would stand there and play, and I got to know him a little bit. And I don't know how I found out about this, maybe listening to public radio or something. But Jake was coming and playing.
We had him twice. Yes.
I know.
Phenomenal talent. Yes.
But I just thought, wow, my friend from Hawaii comes here, and I made him a lay. I went to Hy-Vee, got some kind of $5 flowers, sewed them up and gave them to him.
So I'm a small town kid from Friendship, Wisconsin, population 783. I had the same first, second, and third grade teacher that my parents had. Same house, 2 older brothers, baby sister, same principal, same superintendent that were there, like a 40-year legacy in this Friendship High School. My 2 older brothers and my baby sister never finished high school. And my passion for the arts, when I hit middle school, Donna Shalala was at the University of Wisconsin overseeing the teacher education program. And she convinced, I'm forgetting the governor's name at the time, but Lee Sherman Dreyfus, to put some money into arts integration education, make going to school fun again. So 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and the end of our year was a big production for the community and for our parents and our classmates. But in math class, we did all the calculations for the set design. In science class, we learned how to make paint from scratch, berries and colors and all of this stuff. So every single part of our education was focused on fun stuff, this big production, but we learned a hell of a lot. And so my class, I graduated high school in 1981. The typical Friendship High School graduation rate was about 72%. The rest of the kids would get their GED because they knew they could work at the paper mill or work for one of the automotive plants because that's really all there was to do there. My class, 94% graduated on time, and another 3% finished up a semester later. So it worked. Sadly, it went away, but I got to go off to college in New York City and never looked back, but that group of teachers formed the Sand County Players, which is still going strong. It's a community theater group in my hometown, which will celebrate 50 years, way too soon. So, yeah. Any other questions?
No, we can't tour there.
Yes, it's still open free of charge. When COVID hit, the second floor mansion, which, as I said, when the women's club was in their heyday, they took out all the walls, all the bedroom fixtures, all the fireplaces, all the chandeliers. It was just a big open space for their classes and their lunches and different things. So all along, in addition to finding a $17 million painting hidden in the attic, I found the original blueprints for the mansion. So we had just finished the new addition on the back, that 9,000 square foot Center for Artisan Education, which allows us to do bigger shows and more educational opportunities and spaces for the artists to eat on site without having to go elsewhere. But COVID hit a week after we finished that. We got our certificate of occupancy. We raised $5 million, finished all that space on March 10th of 2020, and the governor shut everything down March 17th. We had one artist claim to fame, that I brought to town that I knew was going to be a big hit. Nate Bergazzi did 2 shows at Hoyt Sherman Place, sold out back-to-back on March 14th, and now he's selling out Wells Fargo Arena for the second time and hosting the Emmys tonight. I kind of like to do that. I found Kelsey Ballerini, Casey Musgraves, just recently Samara Joy, who went on to win 3 Grammy Awards, Best New Artist, so if you can get them right before they're so huge, but a lot of them will remember that. Lyle Lovett is one that he sings our praises all the time, and he'll tell new artists. And Martina McBride, she was whining to him one day about, these big arenas, the sound is terrible, and you can't see anybody's face, and it bounces off a wall. And he said, go to Hoyt Sherman Place. And she did. She was contracted for a 90-minute show. She did 2 hours and 40 minutes. And her husband, who was her tour manager, was like, let's go. We got a show tomorrow. She didn't want to leave. Winona Judd, the same way. So we're happy. We love it.
When is the story of the painting in the attic?
So in 2016, my first winter here, Jackie Schmillen and Lou wanted me to come on their morning talk show, President's Day. Can you talk about the relationship between General Sherman and Hoyt Sherman with President Lincoln? I said, sure. So I asked Annabelle, do we have any Civil War memorabilia? And she said, well, Bob, I think there are some Civil War flags in the flower closet off of the theater, which was this little closet where they would go in and put the silk flowers together for their lunches. And so I'm looking around in there under the table, and I look off to the right, and I see this bare naked butt of a woman on a painting. And so I pulled it out, and I was like, why is this in here? And put it into the lobby area of the theater. And when I laid it down, because it was on wood, it's painted on wood, it was so heavy, laid it face down on a pad, and on the back of it there was a small little tag that said, proprietor Nason Bartholomew Collins, Metropolitan Museum of Art, 1882, 1884. And I thought, Nason Collins was the one that donated the Frederick Edwin Church painting that sold for $4.2 million. This guy might have some taste in art. So sure enough, sent it off to Chicago to have it reviewed by our friend Barry Bauman, who did all of the collection for us, free of charge. He was the chief curator at the Chicago Art Institute, retired, started his own business, sold that for a lot of money, bought a house in New Zealand, was retired for 2 weeks from his second job, and his wife Mary said, Barry, you're driving me crazy, find something to do. Seriously, so he called and he said, I would love to, I've seen a couple of your pieces, I'll restore it. So he restored everything. This one, we were unveiling the Repentant Magdalene, that beautiful one that he restored for us. Also rumored to have been in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, but we had no proof of it. So I said, Barry, can you refer me to somebody that does wood panel art restoration? And he said, that's where I got my start. All the churches in Chicago, that's where I paid for college. I did this. Send it to me, probably not worth anything. He had it in his shop for a week. And he called and he said, this is going to be my final retirement. This is going to be the greatest discovery ever in my life. And sure enough, we made the front page of the New York Times. We made Time Magazine for one of the greatest discoveries of 2018 because it turned out to be a 425-year-old old master's painting by Otto von Wien, who taught Paul Rubens how to paint using this exact allegory of Apollo and Venus. But even more fun, he was very progressive. Otto von Wien was very progressive. So the original Italian drawing, the male figure, Apollo, is center stage and naked. He's the one painting the Mount Helicon and the Hippocrene Spring. And Venus de Milo is off to the side, sheepishly hidden. At the time, painting was considered like a bricklayer. It wasn't a high art form, like a writer or a singer or a doctor. It was a craft. So he wanted to flip that around. So when you come and look at it, he was also very much a feminist. He puts the female figure center stage. She's the one with the paintbrush controlling Mount Helicon. And what she's painting, you can see Pegasus at the top of the mountain. Pegasus in Greek mythology kicks the side of Mount Helicon, creates the Hippocrene spring. So the Hippocrene oath, anybody that had divine intervention or style, they had to drink from that water to be divine. And so, great, the woman is center stage. And to prove that painting was as much of an art form as music and the written word, he intentionally has the female figure with her artist palette over top of Apollo's lyre, because he's the god of music, over top of that. And along the bottom, the inscription is totem ergot orbum. Everything comes from the water. But every other letter is overpainted. So painting trumps the written word as well. So it's just, yeah, it's really cool. And I didn't have a lot of art history background, but I did always tell my mother when I headed off to New York City, from Friendship, 783 people, to New York City, there were more people in my dorm room. I said, one day I'll make the front page of the New York Times art section for a fabulous Broadway show. I make the front page of the New York Times art section for finding a naked lady in an attic. But we didn't sell it. It's appraised because there was no record of when Mr. Collins bought it. In the art world, what they do is, since Otto von Bean has about 30 other pieces everywhere from the Tokyo Museum to the Smithsonian, they do the range of what other pieces have sold for. So 2 in the Smithsonian were about $5 million a piece, and the latest one that Tokyo Museum of Art bought, they paid $17.5 million to get one. And when the news broke, the ambassador from the Netherlands called us and wanted to come see it to verify it, and then also wanted to know if they could buy it to take it back to the Rubens Athenaeum. And we were like, no, I think we'll keep it. So, yes. We good?
That was fantastic. Thank you, Robert. I know you have heard this before, but after you found that painting, every single small historical building went grubbing through every closet, attic, basement. Yeah.
Sorry, I forgot. During COVID, I got a call from a gentleman in Portsmouth, Rhode Island. He was a historian. He and his son had a salvage business. They were hired to tear down Helen Sherman's beach cottage on the Sherman estate in Portsmouth. And he said, there's bundles and bundles and bins of documents, including General Sherman's discharge papers and handwritten letters. Would you like them? Nobody, the people that bought the property were like, oh, we have no connection to this. So drove all the way out in the middle of COVID, brought these bins back. And I'll just share a couple, but from 1903 up until a week before Hoyt died, handwritten letters to his daughter about what was going on in Des Moines at the time. The first one, Sarah got off to school on Monday. I told you the famous granddaughter. Back to Davenport. She's having a tough time settling down to study. I'm done on these long vacations. If this school doesn't prioritize keeping the kids in longer, I'm going to hunt for another school. My visit to Chicago, as you know, if you come to Hoyt Sherman Place, there's a beautiful portrait over the fireplace. April 9th of 1903, my visit to Chicago for the purpose of getting my portrait done by the same gentleman who was on the Supreme Court with our father and has 6 presidential portraits in the White House. Mr. Paixato said he would send us copies from a photograph machine that I can share with you. Just a little doubt that I'll be able to make it. Getting all the kids back into their summer school and houses is my priority. And last but not least, politics never changes. May 1, 1903. Received your letter dated May 28th and just receiving this morning and taking time to write back. We'll be on the lookout for your husband when he arrives here via St. Louis on the 4th. Very sorry that you could not be with him. I fear that there will be nothing going on at all to interest him in Des Moines because we just had a flying visit here from the President of the United States with his numerous horde of followers. On Wednesday, they spent 2 hours and 40 minutes here at our house. Then he made a general round of the city, delivered a half dozen speeches, shook hands with all the patriots of Iowa, and has secured all of the Republican support to aid him in his renomination. This is where Hoyt's humor comes into play. It was about the most bold-faced electioneering tour that any president in my experience ever indulged me in, and I never, ever, ever want to have to go through that again. There was nothing short of him bringing any type of enthusiasm to the crowd, only bold-faced, sloppy self-admiration of the man. That was Teddy Roosevelt.
Oh. I think we should have him back every single year. This was fantastic. So, thank you. Our next presentation is Sunday, October 19th. Michael Swanger, the editor, creator of the Iowa History Journal, will be talking about the Soldiers and Sailors Monument, that wonderfully tall statue. It's celebrating the end of the Civil War, so Iowa, with our very famous participation, most men who were enlisted as of any state in the Union. This was a monument that was decades in the making, but certainly has a place of pride next to our legislative building. So thank you so much to everyone. Please pick up some information about the Heritage Jubilee, which is on Saturday, October 11th, and we'll see you again next month.